A young tyrannosaur died with its last meals still inside its body. Not scraps from some giant carcass. Inside the abdomen of a juvenile Gorgosaurus, paleontologists found the hind limbs of two small, year-old dinosaurs. They had been swallowed in separate feeding events. That single fossil rewrites what baby dinosaur should even mean. This predator was not simply a scaled-down version of the adults around it. Its skull was narrower, its teeth more blade-like, its body lighter overall. And the prey inside it belonged to a size class very different from the huge herbivores mature tyrannosaurids are known to have eaten. So growing up could mean more than getting bigger. For some dinosaurs, it may have meant changing ecological roles as their bodies changed. Biologists call this an ontogenetic niche shift. An animal uses different resources, habitats, or feeding roles at different stages of life. Dinosaurs had the potential for extreme shifts because the largest species began at only a tiny fraction of adult mass. A 2026 study described a hatchling foot bone identified as Tyrannosaurus rex, along with a hatchling foot bone from Gorgosaurus. Those animals weighed only about 2.5 kilograms when they died, less than 0.1% of adult mass. Bone tissue in the T-Rex specimen was interpreted as evidence of movement after hatching, and tooth wear suggests that at least some very young tyrannosaurs were already feeding on relatively large vertebrates. It hatched already able to move, and the tooth wear suggests it was already feeding itself. This was an active animal, with very different limits than the giant it might eventually become. The juvenile Gorgosaurus makes the next stage unusually concrete. Its stomach contained two young cytypes, small beaked oviraptorosaurian theropods. The prey remains were preserved inside the body cavity, and differences in digestion indicate they were eaten at different times. This is direct evidence of what one young tyrannosaur consumed. Now compare that with mature tyrannosaurids. Adults developed massive skulls, thick teeth, and feeding systems capable of handling much larger animals. Fossil feeding traces show large tyrannosaurids consuming megaherbivores, while growth studies show major changes in skull proportions, tooth robusticity, and bite performance as tyrannosaurs matured. Juveniles and adults were not necessarily using completely different jaws. The same growing animal was simply gaining access to food that used to be impractical, inefficient, or dangerous to go after. Its whole body was changing too. Young tyrannosaurids were generally more gracile than mature individuals, with relatively slender hind limbs and narrower skulls. Adults became dramatically more robust. Bones cannot give us an exact running speed or replay a particular chase. But they do show that growth changed the mechanical options available to the animal. That sounds straightforward until Tyrannosaurus rex enters the story. For years, several small tyrannosaur skeletons were treated as important examples of young T-Rex. Then, a major 2025 study argued otherwise, that Nanotyrannus was actually a distinct, smaller tyrannosaur, and that some of the growth reconstructions built from those specimens need to be re-evaluated. So we should not place every small tyrannosaur automatically on a path toward giant T-Rex. But Gorgosaurus still gives us a clean case, a young tyrannosaur eating small dinosaurs while mature tyrannosaurids were equipped to exploit much larger prey. Tyrannosaurs were not unique in this either. Take Deinonychus. Researchers sampled carbon isotopes from small and large Deinonychus teeth from two different rock formations. In both places, the small and large teeth showed different isotopic patterns. The authors interpreted that as evidence that younger and older Deinonychus probably consumed different prey. Isotopes cannot hand us a prehistoric menu. They also cannot tell us whether Deinonychus hunted alone or in groups. The study argued that this weighed against a simple wolf-like pack model, but that social conclusion is an inference, not a fossil observation. The firmer result is simpler. Deinonychus provides another clue that feeding niche could change with age. Herbivores make the story even more interesting. A 2022 study of North American hadrosaurids found that young duck-billed dinosaurs had relatively shorter, narrower feeding structures and were likely more selective feeders, favoring softer, low-growing vegetation. Adults developed broader feeding equipment and could exploit tougher plants across a wider range of feeding heights. Picture that same species at 3 different ages in the same landscape, each one drawing on a slightly different part of the plant menu. Then Corythosaurus complicates even that picture. A 2026 biomechanical study of Corythosaurus found that adults produced higher absolute bite forces and could process a wider range of materials. But the juveniles were surprisingly capable for their size. Their jaw muscles scaled in a way that gave them greater bite performance and potential diet breadth than a simple miniature adult model would predict. Being young did not mean being weak. Corythosaurus juveniles outperformed what a simple scaled-down adult model would predict, with feeding systems well suited to the problems they faced at their size. And now the larger consequence becomes visible. When paleontologists reconstruct an ecosystem, a species list can make every species look like one ecological unit. One predator, one herbivore, one niche. Growth breaks that simplicity. If a dinosaur changed its feeding ability, food size, body mechanics, and resource use through life, then one species could occupy several partially different ecological roles before reaching adulthood. A small juvenile and intermediate animal and a giant adult could interact with different prey, competitors, and dangers. Tyrannosaurids make the effect especially dramatic. Researchers have proposed that juveniles and subadults helped occupy part of a missing middle in some late Cretaceous predator communities, where giant tyrannosaurids are common but adult predators of intermediate size are relatively scarce. Nanotyrannus adds an important correction here too. In the Hell Creek ecosystem, another medium-sized tyrannosaur really did coexist with T-Rex. So growing T-Rex cannot simply be used to explain the entire middle predator gap. But the broader idea does not depend on that one example. Gorgosaurus provides direct stomach contents. Deinonychus preserves a chemical dietary signal. Hadrosaur skulls and teeth show age-related feeding differences. Corythosaurus biomechanics show that juvenile performance was not just adult performance scaled downward. And hatchling tyrannosaur remains push the contrast almost back to the beginning of life. There is another consequence that is easy to miss. Age-related diet differences could reduce competition within a species. If juveniles and adults required exactly the same food in the same size range, every new generation would compete directly with the largest members of its own species. But if younger animals concentrated on resources suited to smaller bodies while adults gained access to different or broader resources, some of that competition could be reduced. That is an ecological inference, not something a fossil can show happening in real time. And we should not imagine every dinosaur following a neat sequence of fixed jobs. There would have been overlap, individual variation, changing environments, and enormous differences between species. But the question is no longer whether growing dinosaurs merely became larger. We have direct stomach contents, isotope signals, changing skulls and teeth, biomechanical models, limb proportions, and now extremely young tyrannosaur remains. Together, they show that in at least some dinosaurs, growth changed what foods were practical and how the animal fitted into its ecosystem. So were baby dinosaurs just smaller adults, living out completely different lives from their parents. Neither picture survives the evidence. In the literal, geometric sense, often no, their proportions and feeding systems scaled in complicated, not simply miniature ways. But completely different is too strong too. Nothing here shows juveniles avoiding adults or living in separate worlds. What the evidence actually supports is narrower and stranger than either extreme. For some dinosaurs, the feeding shift was large enough that young and mature individuals occupied meaningfully different parts of the same food web. Which piece of evidence changes your picture more, a juvenile Gorgosaurus with 2 separate meals still in its stomach, or a hatchling that weighed less than a house cat? And that is the strange part of dinosaur growth. The animal was not simply becoming a larger version of the same ecological character. As its body changed, the prey it could tackle, the plants it could process, the competitors it faced, and the role it played could change with it. A juvenile dinosaur was solving the problems of its own size and age, not waiting to become something else. It was already a complete animal in its own right. Growing up did not create a new species. But in some dinosaurs, it could create a remarkably different way of life. That is the kind of correction this channel keeps chasing, not the tidiest version of how a dinosaur lived, but the one the evidence actually supports.